Welcome to the 𝐏𝐞𝐫𝐞 podcast. I'm your host, Luke Burke, and today my guest is Sara Slaybaugh. Sara is a relationships coach, and she is going to be talking to us today about divorce. So, Sara, how are you?
I'm good, Luke. How are you doing today?
I am good. So, thank you for coming on the show. Can you just introduce yourself and tell everyone about, who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So my name is Sara. I'm from Maryland. I am a wife. I'm in a blended family now. I'm divorced and remarried, which you said we're going to talk about the topic of divorce today. So a little bit about my story is I was married for over 10 years. I had 3 kids, and then I wound up getting divorced. After that, of course, I'm living as a single mom, raising my kids, trying to handle all of that responsibility. And I was interested in finding another relationship. And so I started dating, kind of had some trouble through that. It was a bit exhausting and stressful for me. But I found ways and I learned ways to make it a bit more streamlined, more fun, less stressful. And I used all of that to actually find the relationship of my dreams. So I've been remarried now since 2022. And I really realized that I had learned so many things that I could teach somebody else along the way. And so I decided to start a coaching business focusing on helping other single Christian women, whether they're just single or if they've gone through a divorce, help them learn how to find their own relationship of their dreams. So that's where I'm at now and what I'm focusing on now.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. So we'll dive right into the topic of church. So divorce is a taboo topic in the church. It's something that people don't like to touch, mostly because, the scripture speaks very specifically about, divorce in the church, but there are situations where it is allowable. Not to get too, deep into it, but being a Christian, how did you process that through the church that you were going through? How did that impact you through within your church?
Yeah, well, you said it exactly, that divorce in the church is a taboo topic. It's something that is seen very judgmentally. It's something that is not really seen through the lens of a person's situation or a person's circumstance. Largely in the church, I felt that it's viewed more so as this overarching problem or thing that is not redeemable, that you should never do, that it really kind of taints you. And I found that that's really at odds with the story of the Bible, the story of Jesus, right? Because we have Jesus who is a rescuer and a redeemer, and we see in the Bible throughout Scripture of that redemption and that rescue. And I like to refer to Egypt and the Israelites living in Egypt, and they were being oppressed and they were being taken advantage of and treated cruelly and all of this. And God didn't allow that to go on forever. And he put an end to it. And he said, I'm going to bring my people out of there, and they're not to look back. So I think when we're talking about divorce in the church, and what I experienced myself was it was a taboo subject. And it was something where I feel that theme of the Bible is kind of lost in the topic of divorce in the church, because more so people want to focus on divorce being this bad thing and divorce being something that should never happen and a Christian should never do. And I shared kind of that mentality myself years ago before I was divorced. I didn't realize that was kind of the subconscious thoughts I had. I didn't really realize that I had some of those judgments myself, that if I knew another Christian was divorced, I kind of in my mind would think, oh, they didn't try hard enough, or they're not a good enough Christian or something. And I didn't realize I had those thoughts until I went through it myself. And so part of what I'm trying to do also is just bring awareness to people, to have other Christians bring awareness to what are their thoughts surrounding divorce. And going through it myself, I realized that there are situations, like you spoke to a little bit, that God does not want people to stay in. There are situations that are bad for people to stay in, that are causing them a lot of suffering, that are causing perhaps their kids, if they have kids, um, to be in a place where it's not safe or not good for them to be. And so I want kind of the church and fellow Christians to just enter into a person's story a little bit more,
Mm.
so that they can gain a little bit more understanding, instead of putting a blanket judgment on them, if that makes sense.
It does, and I love everything you said, because what it made me think about was there are a lot of times in church where we input our own and replace it with what God is saying, right? So,
Right.
so we may be so, for example, the example I always give when I'm dealing with church stuff, I'm like, well, did Jesus really condemn people in those situations, or did he just offer them some advice and provide them an opportunity to repent? But he didn't sit there and condemn them and
Hmm.
talk bad about them. And there are some people on certain topics in the church, they feel like they just have to beat you up all the time with the Bible,
Yeah.
and a lot of that is just us and our some of our desire to please God, of course, but we kind of take on our own role. So kind of like what you're saying about divorce, it's kind of like everybody's like, oh, you can't do it, you can't do this, you can't do that. So I definitely understand what you're saying, and I think it's an excellent point. So walk us through a little bit how your personal journey, your personal faith journey, um, brought you through the divorce, because I know that there has to be some unbelievable thoughts and torment and torture that you're dealing with when you're going through this. So walk us through a little bit how your faith helped you, and what kind of thoughts what kind of thoughts were you having while all of this was going on?
Yeah, so I was a Christian then. I was a Christian whenever I was going through a divorce. And so initially my thoughts are back to what we were just speaking about, of, it's not right for me to get divorced.
Mm.
And, what does God think about this? Because I've heard a ton in the church about what people like to say God thinks about it.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, are these things true? One of the scriptures that we could probably pick apart at length, possibly at another time, is God hates divorce, but
Mm.
that's something that I think is a little misquoted sometimes, or misconstrued
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. But back then I'm going through hearing that and trying to see, what do I think about that? How can I um, get through my own situation in light of some of the things that are in scripture. And so it wasn't a case where I just was like, well, I'm just going to get divorced, and that's fine. And I don't care.
Mm.
There was a lot for me of, wrestling through my faith and trying to figure out, what did I think God said in the Bible about certain things? What do I think that God says about my situation in particular? And so I really started to dig more into my faith. I went to a Christian counselor.
Mm.
I had some pastoral counseling. I dug into my Bible study even more. And you'll hear a lot of people say that when they go through a hardship, their faith is strengthened.
Mm.
And I would really agree to that, if you turn into your faith.
Mm.
If you're going through a hardship and you're turning away from your faith, well, your faith is probably not going to be strengthened through that. But if you turn towards your faith and towards God through that hardship, you probably are going to walk out on the other side with a faith that's stronger. So that's what I tried to do. And so I tried not to let, these thoughts that I'm having in my mind, these questions, am I not a good enough Christian? Am I not a good enough person? Was I not a good enough wife? Should I have done X, Y, and Z? I tried not to kind of go too far down those, like, bunny trails, because I really need to deal with the situation in front of me, and I needed to move forward. And so I use things such as my Bible study and different friends and things to kind of combat those thoughts. So if I had a thought that come into my mind that was maybe a lie, maybe it's Satan trying to tempt me to a bad way of thinking, then I would go back to scripture and say, what do I feel God says about this?
Mm.
Or there's a ton of scriptures about your worth in God's eyes, especially in the book of Isaiah. So I would actually write those scriptures down and go back to them, and I would see, no, I am valuable in God's eyes, and here's why. And I'd go through those scriptures. So it is a lot of, emotional turmoil when you're going through that. It's a lot of questioning. It's a lot of kind of seeking to understand, some of the whys. We don't always get answers to our whys, but we are tempted to want to explain every single why is this happening, or
Hmm.
and so it is just trying to make sure that your thoughts are, it says in the Bible we should take our thoughts captive, right? And
Right.
renew our minds. And so it's trying to take those thoughts and then line them up with God's truth, and then settle for yourself, what does God's truth say about this? What does God's truth say about me? And so I tried to do that, throughout the process, whether it was initially going through the divorce, there was a lot of that questioning. And then just as a single woman after that, as a single Christian after that,
Mm.
as a single mom, and then as I was looking to date, and then hopefully find a relationship and then wind up finding it, it's still making sure that I'm digging into my faith and, trying to live in a way that I believe that Christ would want me to live.
Right. And what you said something earlier, it made me think so often in our environment, when you say you're a Christian, somehow, some way, people automatically tag on you that you're some type of perfect being. They think, oh, well, you're a Christian, you're not supposed to get divorced, or you're a Christian, you're not supposed to do this, you're a Christian, you're not supposed to do that. And it's like, but I'm also human, just like you. I've never told anybody that I was perfect, but for some reason, when people know that you have a Christian faith, and maybe it's like this in other faiths too, but when people know that you have a faith, they'll automatically start putting in the little bit that they know and start applying it to you. Like, oh, you got a divorce? I thought the Bible's. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you said what you're saying, but you also said, you mentioned becoming a single mom. Not every divorce has kids involved, but yours did. I'm
Mhm.
not sure the age of your kids at the time, but can you talk about how how you went from how you became a single mom and how that impacted you and your relationship with your kids, and all of the things involved with being a single mom and being a Christian on top of that? Because going back to what I said, people look at you and you're like, oh, you got kids. Oh, the first thing people start thinking about, oh, you did that before you were married or after you were married? So people
Yeah.
start having these conversations. That's how people think. They start because they're judging you based on, oh, were you supposed to do this? Did you do it this? So anyway,
Right. Yeah. Well,
talk about
to
that
kind of talk
process.
about that maybe first, about, you're talking about people hear you're divorced and then they hear that you're a Christian, they want to jump on that, like you said. Like it's kind of like, they hold you to a little bit of a higher standard, which we should hold ourselves to a higher
Hmm.
standard if we're Christians, because we're trying to live a Christ-like life, right? But
Right.
exactly what you said, that we're still human, and so you do get a lot of, and like I said, I used to think this way myself. um you kind of get a lot of hesitancy from people once they learn that you're divorced, if they know
Hmm.
that you're a Christian, because they think that these two things don't go together. Like, I think automatically in their mind they're thinking divorce and Christian, these things are not compatible, or these things don't go together. But I would propose that before you can make any kind of rationalization or judgment or opinion or anything like that, you have to enter into the person's story a little bit.
Yeah.
Because, if somebody says, their husband was cheating on them every other day, or their wife was, beating them over the head with a frying pan and threatening to kill them, and their kids had to constantly live in a state of fear, and most people will tell you in those situations, oh yeah, you shouldn't be in a situation like that, or
Right.
that wouldn't be good for your kids to witness, or that wouldn't be good. um but they're very um quick to provide what you're saying, the judgment of, oh, you're a Christian and you're divorced, that doesn't go together. And they're much slower, if not at all, to kind of step into your circumstance and maybe just even ask you a question about the circumstance to help them better understand, was this a situation where maybe somebody felt unsafe, or they were unsafe, or it was a situation that was eating them away emotionally, or whatever. And everybody has their different situations. But the point I'm making with that is that we shouldn't have these rash judgments without entering into somebody else's story. And the other part of that I learned myself is, it's not everybody's business, every part of the story anyways. And so, as Christians, we're called to love each other anyways. We're called to especially love our fellow Christians, right? And so if I was having a conversation and told somebody that I was divorced, I would hope that they wouldn't feel the need to try to determine for themselves if they thought my divorce was okay or not. And that's kind of what you're alluding to, I think, is that people try to do, they try to see, oh, well, what was your situation in that situation? Was it allowable? Was it not allowable? And I would just caution people to, how about we stop trying to enter into us being the judge and us deciding if this was appropriate for that person or not, because I think, like you also alluded to, we know very, very little of the story. And instead, it would be more helpful to just come alongside the person and be like, I realize this is a tough situation for you. How is it impacting you? How are you being affected? What kind of help would you need? Without even needing to know any part of the story or assess for ourselves whether we think it was okay or not. And then for the second part of your question about being a single mom, so my kids, my oldest right now is 14 and my youngest is 9. And this was years ago that I was initially divorced. And so I had young kids, as I still have young kids. And so for them, I always try to explain things to my kids honestly, but at an age appropriate level. So, it's just giving the kids enough information that they're understanding what's going on a little bit. It's at their level. It's not giving them more information. And it's also not just telling them that, everything's none of their business or whatever. There's some things that, I'll say to my kids, for instance, sometimes they do ask me even now, one of my kids in particular asks me even now, why did you get divorced? And I just tell them that it's just not an appropriate conversation for us to have, and that as their mom, of course, I answer their questions when they need answers, and I always talk honestly and all of that with them. But if there is something where I just feel like, that's more of a private conversation, it's not something that you and I, the child and I, would really need to discuss. I just kind of tell them that like that. I just say, well, it's not really, it wouldn't be appropriate really for me to delve into all these details. And I would just say something to the effect of, I love you, your dad loves you, you have a lot of good family around that love you. And, even though this has happened, we're doing well and we got through it, and just kind of leave it as that, and so that's kind of how it affected me and my kids a little bit. And then of course I was trying to date as a single mom, and same thing with that. I just kind of was honest with them. I didn't tell them initially, hey, mom's dating or anything like that. But, for instance, I am remarried now. And so when I was dating my now husband, I just gave them honest information. So he and I were friends at first, and they even asked, like, are you dating? And I said, no, we're just friends. And then when we decided to date, I again just explained honestly to them at their level, hey, we are going to date. We decided that we're going to date, see how it goes. But I did wait until we were far enough into the relationship that I felt it was secure, to say that to them. So.
Oh no, I definitely understand. So, the last question about the kids part, should a couple, there's constant debate about this. Um, I have an older son. I have a 16-year-old, and I now have a 3-year-old daughter. So my position has shifted slightly on this topic. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't completely decided how I see it. But do you feel like, and I'm not talking about a situation where someone is being abused, that kind of situation. I'm just talking divorce in general. Do you feel like someone should stay in a divorce or stay in a marriage for the upbringing of their kids? Like, again, I'm not talking about like a serious situation where kids are afraid, kind of the stuff you alluded to earlier, but I'm just speaking
Yeah.
in general.
Yeah. So, I've thought about this question, of course,
Hmm.
too. And my first go-to is about a situation that is abusive situation, or it's a situation where it's not good or not safe, or maybe mentally unstable for the
Mm-hmm.
kids or the parent to stay in a relationship. Situations like that, I would definitely say that is not a situation to stay in for the sake of the kids.
Right.
It's not a situation to stay in for the sake of anybody. That's a situation where you need to, get help to get yourselves out of the situation and into a safe area. Um, and it's good that you specifically say that for situations like that too, because some of what we hear about divorce, um, they don't preface the advice surrounding it with a statement like that. And so they'll, and I do find this in the Christian community. It was one of the things that hurt me from the church
Mm.
when I was going through the divorce, or before I was actually getting divorced, was I was trying to find help on the subject, and I just found blanket statements and blanket opinions that were just saying, any Christian has to stay at all costs. Any Christian has to, endure whatever, and they didn't preface it with a statement that was talking about some of these situations that we're talking about. So it is very good to separate that out anyways, and like you said, to say, hey, I'm not talking about a situation where
Yeah. Yeah.
this is happening and people should get out, because sometimes that's not said, and then the people that are in that situation
Yeah.
then feel like what you're saying still applies to them, if that makes sense. um, so to kind of answer your question, but speak to that first, in that situation, definitely, you should not stay for the sake of the kids, because it's not a good situation for anybody to be in. And then my thoughts about, the other side of that equation then is, if it's a relationship where, there's not abuse going on, there's not any kind of destruction, or any kind of abuse of power, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a situation where the parents have spent so much time raising the kids that they're no longer, dating each other, and they're no longer, spending their free time together. And, you'll hear the phrase like, we grew apart, or something like that. Um, in that situation, I would say that it's best then to get some kind of help to bring the relationship back together,
Mm-hmm.
some kind of help to, maybe we need to start prioritizing our relationship again, because I do feel that the marriage should come first in a family, in my opinion. And you'll get all kinds of different opinions on this too, but I think the marriage should come before the kids, because if you don't have that strong structure of the marriage, then the family unit's going to break down, right? And then it's going to affect the kids negatively anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that the marriage relationship needs to be the priority, and that, the kids would come after that. And some people listening may agree, they may not agree.
Yeah.
Everybody's entitled to their own opinion on that, of
Right.
course. But so I would say, if it's a situation where it's not abuse or anything like that, um, I would try to stay together, not for the sake of the kids. I mean, that certainly is an important consideration. I would
Mm-hmm.
want to stay together for the kids,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd want to stay together because this is my marriage,
Right.
right? This is what I want for my family. This is what I want for myself. This is what I want for my spouse. This is what I believe God wants for me. And so it's kind of all of that, wrapped up. And so I would just say that in situations like that, I think people should reach out for help. I think that they should start getting to know their spouse a little bit more. I think that they should reach out to somebody that can maybe help them do that. So it wouldn't necessarily just be, oh, we're going to stay together just for the sake of the kids, because, that's not really a relationship that's joined and bonded correctly anyways,
Right.
if that's kind of the thinking behind that. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. And when you were saying that, I was also thinking, you were talking about kids, and it's not so much about staying together for the kids, because what happens in a marriage, ideally, your kids will one day be 25 years old on their own, out the house, doing their own thing. Well, if the whole marriage is focused only around the kids, when the kids are gone, you don't have really a lot left. And I think when people
Right.
hear that, they think that you're saying neglect your kids for your
Right.
spouse, but it's not really meant like that. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. There are so many cliches or taboo or whatever topics that people take way out of context,
Right.
from what we're saying. So, but we want to
Yeah,
be
it's
able
like
to still connect. Go ahead.
yeah, you have to, you think of that because you hear about people that are about to be empty nesters and they've been
Hmm.
raising their kids for 2 decades now. And all of a sudden the dynamic is going to shift. And it's like, you can't go for those 2 decades without dating your spouse. You've got to use
Right.
those 2 decades. You're still dating your spouse. You're still getting to know your spouse. You're still spending time with them. And sometimes you need to do that purposefully,
Mhm.
even if you maybe don't feel like it, or even if you're tired, or put it on the calendar that you're regularly going to have time to spend with each other, because you don't want to neglect your kids, certainly.
Right.
However, your relationship, if it's going to be your primary priority in your family life, then yeah, you've got to give it some time. And the dynamics are going to change, of course. So, when you're raising kids, you've got to pour a lot of time into your kids, but you can't
Mm.
neglect your relationship during that time, completely, or else it's going to be way harder than later,
Yeah.
to try to salvage it if you've kind of let it go.
Yeah, and it's really hard, especially having, like I said before, I have a 3-year-old daughter, so it becomes, I have a 16-year-old and a 3-year-old. So the 16-year-old, he's kind of independent now. The 3-year-old, she wants to be independent, but
Yeah.
she's not quite at that point. But I wanted to a couple more questions, and then we'll close out here. But I really love this conversation, and I hope that we can find a way to continue this, because there's a lot of stuff here, and I'll talk to you a little bit
Mhm.
about that after we're done. But one of the things you said in your bio, you talked about going through a divorce and reacclimating yourself. Like, you're no longer in those same circles anymore. It's like the couple family that you used to hang out with, now they might be looking at you kind of weird, like, do I say hi to this
Right.
one and not to that one? So can you talk a little bit about, because you stated before, you're remarried now, so now you have new circles, different circles as far as couples go, but can you talk a little bit about that whole reacclimation thing? Because I imagine that um we've been married for 18 years, and I can't imagine like having to do that. So can you talk a little bit about that process for someone that's listening? Like, they're thinking, they're dreading that. I think you mentioned the word, you felt a weariness, or a certain type of feeling, dreadfulness. I can't remember exactly the word you used, but just going through that process. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with, like we were saying, being a Christian going through a
Mm,
divorce, because of like the judgment that we were talking about and everything. Um, I feel like maybe as a Christian, you might get a double dose of that kind of.
yeah.
Whereas if I wasn't a Christian, maybe it wouldn't affect so many relationships or so many of my previous circles, or you know what I mean? But um, yeah, you get divorced and you kind of think, like you were saying, well, we had this friendship where it was the husband and the wife, and like our kids played with their kids, and like,
Mhm.
how do we now go about navigating those friendships? Like, am I supposed to still be friends with that husband? Should I only now be friends with the wife because now I'm a
Right.
single woman, kind of,
Yep.
you know what I mean? And so it's like, I want my kids to continue those relationships with their kids. And, and so it does kind of throw this new dynamic into situations like that. And, some relationships, it's just fine. It doesn't really change much, and it's not an issue. And some relationships, you know, might come to an end just because the dynamics have changed. So it doesn't necessarily mean it came to an end because somebody stopped talking to you purposefully because of it or whatever. But maybe the dynamics just changed so much that, it just naturally kind of came to an end. And so
Mhm.
I have some friendships like that where I didn't feel, the other person didn't condemn me for getting divorced or whatever and say I'm not going to be your friend anymore. But just how things change, and how life moves on, whether you get divorced or whether you're not. You might have friendships with your spouse and another couple when your kids are little, and then by the time your kids are like 10 or so, you don't hang out with those people anymore. And so some of it is just, it's going to change anyways. And so that's a good thing to keep in your mind, is that some relationships are going to change regardless. I have a friend that has blatantly said that she had friendships where the friend did not agree with her getting a divorce, and they blatantly told her they were not going to continue being a friend to her. Knowing her story, I think that was very wrong
Mm.
of her friend. But there are some situations where that does happen to people, and it's good for people on the outside to know that, because it brings more awareness to how could I help my friend that's going through this divorce? How could I help support them? Because you probably don't want to be a person like that that's just going to turn their back, especially when somebody needs more support in this situation. So one of the things that I really went through was feeling like I'm an outsider in like faith-based circles.
Mm.
So not just friendships and things like that, but for instance, my Bible study. I remember going into my Bible study, and there was a particular question. I don't remember exactly what the question was, but there was a particular question that had to do with a single woman.
Mm.
And the answers that I was hearing in the group, again, from everybody that I believe was married, everybody that was not in my situation. I kind of looked around the room one by one to see like who had a wedding ring on, because that's
Mm.
something that you kind of you become hyper aware of that after you go through this. And so I kind of was looking around at all the women, and it seemed to me that every woman was married and was
Mm.
far removed from the situation the question was talking about. The
Mm.
question was talking something about a single woman, what should she do, or something like that. And all of their opinions on the question were very different than mine.
Mm.
And they were trying to weigh in on what they thought the single woman should do.
Mm.
And I was actually in that situation, and I felt that the responses I was getting, they weren't directing them at me, they were just answering the question. But me sitting there, I felt it all.
Mm.
Me sitting
Mhm.
there, I'm like, they are really offering a lot of, to me, it seemed like self-righteousness. Like, well, if I wouldn't do that,
Mm.
if that was me, I wouldn't do that. This person in the Bible, they shouldn't have done that. And I was sitting there as a woman going through that experience, and I could understand how that question would have played out, or I could understand how the person in the question would have felt, and how it would have been difficult for them. And so
Mhm.
things like that, it's like I really felt like an outsider that particular day in that circle, because I just really felt like nobody understood what I was, you know, about
Mhm.
anymore. Nobody, it didn't seem like they were interested in learning more about the situation or seeking to understand the specific circumstance. And I didn't speak up and say, hey, I'm divorced. Like, you're kind of talking about me. Like,
Right.
I didn't do that.
Right.
I was just having this internal, you know, conversation with myself. But it's another example of how you can feel, set apart. You can feel like you don't belong anymore, because then I just really felt like everybody in here is married and they just don't get it. They
Yeah.
don't understand where I'm coming from or what my new perspective is.
Mm.
Um, I think they kind of had the mentality that I had before, before I went through it myself. And so you do feel like sometimes you're an outsider.
Mm.
And I would just say that's okay to realize that there might be some changes like that. There may be some places that you really fit in before and you don't anymore. But I would also say, give it some thought and give it some time before you just discount a group like that. So that particular instance, I, reflected back on it and I thought this is a good Bible study. Like, I get a
Yeah.
lot out of it. My kids were going to it at the time. They got a lot out of it. And so I really stayed in it. I was contemplating, maybe this isn't for me anymore.
Mm.
But I thought it through and I thought it's a good place for me to be. It's a good place for my kids to be. I'm not going to agree with everything that's said there.
Hmm.
And so I decided to stay, and I'm glad I
Right.
decided to stay. But there will be some situations like that where you will feel like an outsider, and maybe that's okay. And maybe you can use some of those feelings then to help educate the other people, on how they could have maybe helped more in that situation, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. No, it does. And it sounds like, just listening to you talk, it sounds like what we all need is a little dose of empathy and compassion, because we really don't know a person's situation. And that goes for anything. That's outside of divorce. If you see somebody
Hmm.
that's, not, having a good day, we just don't know what they're going through.
Right.
So I just want to kind of wrap it up a little bit and say, and ask you the last couple questions. There's probably somebody out here that's going to watch this or going to see this, and they're going through a divorce. They don't know what's next. They don't know what to
Hmm.
do. They don't know how to process these feelings. They don't know how to reach out to anybody because they're so embarrassed about what we talked about. They can't reach out to their church, and if even if they're just single, just with anybody really, they don't. They just don't know what to do next. So for someone that's watching this that may be going through a divorce or thinking about filing for a divorce themselves, what would you say should be next for this person? What should they start to prepare themselves for?
Yeah, so I would say, the obvious thing is get some sort of legal counsel. That way you're really not letting your thoughts go down this what if, tangent, without having actual factual information about, um, you know, what goes on during a divorce or
Mm.
where you might be after the divorce. So I would say, first and foremost, you should get some sort of legal counsel. But aside from that, see what you need. Do you need to get professional counseling? Do you need to get somebody that can help you sort through your feelings? Are you feeling really depressed about it and you need to go seek some help for that? Is it just that you need to talk to a pastor about it? Do you just need a friend to talk to about it? So I would just say, try to be a little bit discerning about what are your safe spaces to reach out to, because you don't want to reach out to just anybody, right, with personal information like that. You want to make sure that you really choose somebody that you feel is not going to be judgmental, that you feel is going to be compassionate, that you feel does want to understand where you're coming from. And so I would definitely say reach out to somebody like that, regardless of what your issue is. But also, if it's specifically divorce, then I would also caution to reach out to somebody that is not like the people we were talking about at the very beginning, where they're just blatantly saying, God hates divorce and everybody that gets divorced is wrong. And, that is not going to be helpful to you. It's probably going to be hurtful to you as it was hurtful to me,
Mm.
because my divorce was going to happen, or it did happen, and so reaching out to somebody that's just going to offer me condemnation, or like I was talking about, reading articles online that are supposed to be Christian articles, but they're only offering me condemnation and no redemption, no,
Yeah.
no hope or anything like that. I would really just steer clear of that. I think that you need to decide which voices you're going to listen to and which voices you're not. And I think that you need to find yourself some support with somebody that is actually willing to understand your situation if they haven't been through it themselves, or if they have been through it, certainly seek out somebody that has been through it, because they can offer you so much wisdom and so much understanding, and they will come with you from that place of understanding, that place of compassion, that, hey, I get it, I've been there, this is what got me through. And ultimately that's what I'm trying to do in my business. I realized that I didn't know really what a healthy relationship was versus what an unhealthy relationship was. I didn't really know how to recognize a red flag, or I
Mm.
didn't really know, if I recognized it, how can I confidently say no to that and not just continue in a relationship that has all these red flags in it.
Yeah.
So I had to learn a lot of that myself. Um, and then I realized I want to help somebody else find a good relationship for themselves. I want somebody else to realize that good relationships do exist. And I want to help also younger single women to not settle. I want to help them realize what they actually want in a relationship and how could they actually go about getting it. Because I want to prevent divorce in the first place too.
Mm.
I want to help people choose a healthy relationship and know how to look for that from the front end before they get into a relationship, so that they can make wiser choices. Because I feel like a lot of that I had to learn along the way. And so I want to turn back and kind of just help them take a bit of a shortcut,
Hmm.
give them the wisdom that I learned as I was going through it. And so I would just say, they need to seek out whatever help that they feel is appropriate for them, whether they're going through a divorce or if it's some other situation. Find somebody that's actually going to want to come into your space a little bit, sit down with you, understand, or somebody that's gone through the same thing you're going through, and you can kind of get some advice and support from them, because they know what to offer you, because they're going to offer you the same thing that they needed themselves when they were going through it.
Right. No, I understand. And so, to close, I just want to ask kind of a two, three-part question. Is not really a question, but so now that you said you're remarried now, things are a little bit different. So if you can talk briefly about the feeling of being remarried, and then also any last encouraging words, being remarried and in a blended family, and also
Yeah.
any encouraging words you can leave for someone who's watching this, who's really knee deep into everything.
Yeah. So, being remarried, it took me a while to uh, get remarried after I was divorced. So it was several years. I think it was like 4 or 5 years. I always, get confused on the actual dates and actual
Hmm.
year, but I was single for years.
Okay.
Um, and so I would really say take your time. You don't want to jump into a relationship right away. I think that you need to learn, like I was saying, learn about red flags, learn about healthy relationships. Take some time to figure out who you are as a person and what you actually want, what you actually enjoy. And if it is a situation of divorce, do some healing. So take some time for that before jumping into another relationship. So I feel like I did that, and then going through dating, I really developed a clear picture and a clear idea of what I was looking for, what I wanted, because I didn't want to settle. There's a lot of fear out there of settling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and people tend to settle because they are lonely and they want the attention and they want affection and things. Not them seeking attention like they're greedy or
Hmm.
whatever, but just a basic human, you know, want for a partner, basic human want and need for love and affection and things like that. And so if you don't know what you want, you don't have that at your forefront, you can more easily be swayed by certain things and wind up in a relationship that is not really the type of relationship you want to be in. So I would say to really get clear on what you want, and then learn how to stick to that. So that's what I did. I learned how to say no to relationships and people that didn't line up with what I really wanted, because I was clear on that. I learned how to go about finding the types of people that I was interested in, the types of people that were in line with what I actually wanted in a relationship. And so I kind of used all of that to find, my now husband, and we have a great relationship. We have a very loving relationship. We have a very healthy relationship. And, it took some time for me to learn all of that and develop all of that. But sticking to what you really want and not being swayed by some of these other things is really key and is really critical to that. And so we are in a blended family. Like I told you, his children are adults and my children are younger. So my children live with us, but
Okay.
it's been good. I feel like we have a good blended family. I feel like he has a really good relationship with my kids. He's their stepdad. And,
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for somebody that wanted to be a stepdad,
Right.
that wanted to have a relationship with my kids where it's not just like, oh, those are your kids and you deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
I was not looking for that at all. And so I really set my sights on somebody that valued family and togetherness and things like that.
Mm.
And so I would say that people, need to be clear on what they want and all of that. Being in a blended family has challenges, just like being in a regular family has challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I wanted to mention is, for the topic of divorce, you hear a lot, oh, if you get divorced, like it's going to affect your kids negatively in all of
Mm.
these ways. It's going to be bad in this way and it's going to be bad in this way. And so if there's somebody listening that has those fears, that, oh, if I get divorced, this is what's going to happen to your kids and that's what's going to happen to your kids and that's going to be bad and all this, you need to also see, especially if it's in a bad situation, like we mentioned, if it's an
Mm-hmm.
abusive situation, if it's an emotionally, really damaging situation or whatever, your kids are going to have negative effects from that bad relationship. And so trying to sway somebody to stay in a bad relationship by telling them that, well, if you get divorced, this percentage of kids go on to do this and this percentage of kids go on to do that, it's like it doesn't apply to the situation where it's bad for the kids to stay in, because
Mm-hmm.
those have their own statistics of what's good and what's bad. So if somebody's listening and they're in the situation where they're fearing that what's going to happen to my kids, I went through that same thing too. And again, I had to really see that God wanted good for me and my kids. And I knew that he was going to provide for it one way or the other. May look different than what I thought. But I needed to realize that, he could work through a divorce um, and bring good out of it. And so I tried not to focus on all of these statistics and everything that people want to throw at you about, how bad this would be for your kids if this happens. So I just want to kind of encourage somebody with that, that if you're in a bad situation or an abusive situation in any way, that's not good for your kids,
Mm.
and so I would definitely recommend not staying in a situation like that. And then anybody listening that is thinking about divorce or already divorced and they're feeling, really lonely or really down or really depressed or anything like that, I think you just need to realize and be encouraged that divorce is not the end all be all.
Mm.
Like your life is going to go on. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, this is something in your life that happened that you didn't expect to happen. You didn't plan for it to happen. You know, maybe you're in a situation where you never thought you would be in this situation, and maybe you're feeling shame about that or really down about that, whether you should or shouldn't feel that way. Those are some of the feelings that we have. And I would just say that it's going to get better. You can grow through a divorce. You can, be opened up to new blessings and new possibilities that you wouldn't have maybe had before. And I would just say, with my own personal story, like I said, I'm in a very healthy relationship right now. And I just see blessings after blessing after blessing. I feel
Mm.
that God took care of me, that He provided for me and my family, and that He really taught me a lot during this whole process, to get me to where I am now. And I really am just looking back, and I'm just grateful. And so
Mm.
there is a lot of hope. There is a lot of encouragement. There is a lot of blessing, that can come through this, even if you're somebody that is now going through a divorce or contemplating a divorce.
Wow, that was a lot of good advice. As you were talking, I was just, thinking about some conversations I've had with people regarding this topic, and it is a very tough topic. And I commend you for being confident enough and bold enough, even though I'm sure it took you some time, but I commend you for being able to come through and talk so publicly about it, because I believe it's going to help so many people. And we know that we see the stats, how high the divorce rates are, and people need a conversation, because no matter what someone says, nobody really wants to go through a divorce, right? No
Right.
matter what somebody says, nobody really wants to go through that. You're building your life with someone, you're merging everything with that person, or those people with the kids, if it's a blended family, or you never, whatever that blended relationship situation is. So I commend you for being able to do that, and I want to thank you for coming on the show. So, but the last thing is, if you could tell everyone how to reach you, or any books that you can recommend, or anything that's off the top of your head that you can recommend. If you don't have any, you want to come back later, I can add it to the description. But just wanted to give you the floor to share your information and any other resource that you might have.
Yeah, so if anybody is interested in me coaching them, whether they're divorced or whether they're a single Christian woman looking for their own healthy relationship, I can certainly help you with that. If you want to find me or more about me, you can find me on Facebook. My profile is largely public on Facebook, so you just search my name, Sara Slaybaugh. My business page on Facebook is Sara Slaybaugh Coaching. You can also find me on YouTube at Sara Slaybaugh Coaching. And I'll give you those links and things that you can put in the show notes too. So that's kind of where you can find me online. You should be able to find me pretty easily if you're
Okay.
interested in my coaching program or anything like that, or just following along with my profile on my page. As far as different resources and things, there was a book that somebody recommended to me when I was going through my divorce. It's called When Your Relationship Ends. I think it's
Mm.
called Rebuilding When Your Relationship Ends. That might be helpful to somebody. There is a ministry called Family Life Blended that
Oh
does a
yeah,
blended
family
family
life.
Christian
Yeah,
ministry.
yeah,
There are not that many out there, blended family Christian ministry.
yeah.
And so that's a good one. Again, it's called Family Life Blended. There's a leader named Ron Deal who is part of that ministry, and he has his own separate ministry also, and he's also an author. He's written many books around all of these topics. So one
Mm.
of them is Dating and the Single Parent. I actually didn't know about that book when I was dating. I wish I did, but
Mm.
from reading an excerpt that I saw, a lot of what I read is in line with my beliefs and what I would teach
Yeah.
somebody in my coaching program if they're dating and if they're a parent. He also has one called the Smart Step Family that I'm reading through now. That's for blended families, and that actually would be a good resource to read before you're even in a relationship. If you're considering getting
Mm.
into another relationship and you have kids, a friend of mine recommended that book to me and actually gave it to me, and she said I should read it even before um, preparing to be in a blended family. So those are some of the resources that, off the top of my head have been helpful to me that might be helpful to somebody else.
No, I appreciate it, and I'm familiar with family life because they have so many resources
Hmm.
available. So once again, thank you, Sara. I really appreciate your time, and hold on to the line, and we'll get back to this. So everyone else, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. All right, I am stopping recording.